Imagine standing in the grand halls of a royal palace, summoned by a queen whose every word carries the weight of life and death. She stares at you, her voice trembling with a mix of authority and desperation. "Tell me the fate of my children," she demands. You pause, knowing the wrong answer could ruin you. If her sons prosper, you'll be labeled a fraud. If they fall, you might face accusations of witchcraft, or worse. That was the reality for Nostradamus in the 1550s, a man whose cryptic predictions earned him fame, but also bound him in an endless web of pressure, blame, and isolation. Being Nostradamus wasn't a gift. It was a life of impossible choices, constant scrutiny, and burdens few could endure. In this video, we'll dive into 3 defining struggles that made Nostradamus' life far more difficult than most people realize. First, we'll explore the relentless pressure he faced as nobles and commoners alike demanded his advice, and how it nearly cost him everything. Then, we'll step into the plague-ridden streets of Provence to see how he became both a savior and a scapegoat. Finally, we'll uncover the profound loneliness of a man haunted by his own visions of death and disaster. Each story reveals the human cost behind the myth of prophecy. Stay with us. You won't want to miss this. Let's start in the glittering court of Queen Catherine de' Medici. She was no ordinary monarch. Catherine was a political powerhouse, desperate to secure the future of her children in a volatile Europe. When she summoned Nostradamus, it wasn't a casual request. She demanded predictions, clarity, certainty, everything Nostradamus was careful never to give. Standing before her, surrounded by opulence and power, Nostradamus faced a daunting task. He couldn't be too optimistic. That would make him seem naive. He couldn't be too grim. That might cost him his life. Finally, he spoke. "Great trials lie ahead for your sons." The words were deliberate, vague enough to protect himself, but ominous enough to keep the queen listening. But instead of providing clarity, the prediction only deepened Catherine's anxieties. Every challenge her sons faced, every illness or political crisis, was now measured against Nostradamus' cryptic warning. Whispers spread through the court. Was he truly a prophet or a fraud? This wasn't a one-time ordeal. As his reputation grew, nobles, merchants, and commoners alike sought his advice on everything from politics to their personal lives. Imagine the pressure of having your every word scrutinized, twisted, and taken as gospel. For Nostradamus, it wasn't just exhausting, it was dangerous. If you were in his place, how would you handle it? Leave a comment below. Would you speak your mind, or stay vague and protect yourself? The stakes weren't limited to the court. Outside the palace walls, Nostradamus faced a different kind of trial, one that was far deadlier. Picture this: the plague is sweeping across Europe, and Nostradamus is trudging through the disease-ridden streets of Provence. The stench of death hangs heavy in the air. Families cry out for help, desperate for a cure. Nostradamus responds with everything he has: herbal remedies, hygiene practices, and advice to bury the dead quickly. His rose pills might not have been a true cure, but his insistence on sanitation saved lives. Still, it was never enough. Entire villages fell, and the whispers began. He knew this would happen, they said. Why didn't he stop it? The same reputation that brought people to his door now made him a target. His association with prophecy and mysticism painted him as a man with secrets that frightened the superstitious. Despite his tireless efforts to save lives, he was accused of sorcery, blamed for the very deaths he fought to prevent. Imagine the frustration, the helplessness. You dedicate yourself to helping people, only to have them turn on you when the outcome doesn't meet their hopes. For Nostradamus, it wasn't just about the loss of lives, it was about the loss of trust. If this sounds familiar, if it reminds you of how fear often finds a scapegoat, hit like. It's a cycle we still see today, centuries later. But perhaps the hardest part of Nostradamus' life wasn't the pressure or the blame, it was the loneliness. Imagine seeing the future, not as a bright, hopeful horizon, but as a relentless series of disasters. Nostradamus' quatrains were filled with wars, famine, and death, written in symbolic language that shielded him from the full horror of his visions. Or so he hoped. Take one of his most famous prophecies. The young lion will overcome the older one on the field of combat. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. Decades later, King Henry II of France died in a jousting match when a lance shattered his helmet and drove into his eye. The world saw it as proof of Nostradamus' gift. For him, it was a tragedy he had foreseen and couldn't prevent. Now, imagine living with that burden: wars you can't stop, plagues you can't cure, deaths you can't prevent. Nostradamus didn't write in riddles just to protect himself from accusations of witchcraft. He wrote that way to protect himself from the unbearable weight of clarity. Alone in his study, surrounded by the flicker of candlelight, Nostradamus must have felt the crushing isolation of knowing too much. His visions were both his gift and his curse, a curse that set him apart from the very people he sought to help. From the glittering courtrooms of France to the disease-ridden streets of Provence, Nostradamus lived a life that was anything but enviable. He was praised, blamed, and feared in equal measure. Yet, despite it all, he left a legacy that continues to captivate the world. Nearly 500 years later, we still pore over his cryptic verses, searching for meaning in their mystery. But the truth is, Nostradamus' story isn't just about prophecy. It's about the cost of being extraordinary in an unforgiving world. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining us on this journey. Subscribe for more stories that dive deep into the struggles behind the legends. And remember, sometimes the greatest burden isn't what you see. It's knowing you can't change it.